economic report, economic outlook for the globe, specifically looking at Africa, sees the continent contracting by 2.8% this year. The largest economy, Nigeria, will contract, according to the World Bank projections, by 3.2% in 2020, amid the collapse in oil prices, the most severe contraction in what they're looking at is possibly 4 decades. South Africa, activity expected to contract by worse, 7.1% this year. South Africa has a myriad of issues. Deepest contraction in a century and 8% weaker than previously forecast, as stringent but necessary domestic containment measures severely disrupted activity. Joining us to discuss these figures is Mr. Johnson Chukwu, the CEO of Cowry Asset Management. Good morning to you, Mr. Johnson Chukwu. Welcome to the program. So, Nigeria's, if you look at the figures, 139 billion naira negative trade balance, 2 consecutive quarters of negative trade balance where imports exceeded exports, excuse me. What does this say, Mr. Chukwu, about the path that Nigeria is trying to make to, consume more than we produce and also export more, since we haven't reached there? What does this say?
Thank you, Lotus, for having me. The journey to transforming our consumption pattern and our exports will take some time. If you look at the export and import report that was published by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, you will observe in terms of imports that oil still account for about 72%. I mean, in terms of export, oil still account for 72% of our exports. And what that means is that if you take some time to diversify the economy the way we don't want it to be, because there are some fundamental issues we need to address before we see that level of diversification. But that does not take away the fact that, irrespective of the fact that we're having a negative balance of trade, that we are seeing some improvement in. For instance, if you look at our export, you see the agricultural export actually increased in the first quarter of 2020. We also saw increase in the export of manufactured goods. So, I mean, if you look at some of the critical sectors that the government has focused on, particularly the agricultural sector, where you saw an increase, material increase in the exports, that will give you some level of assurance that somehow the policies are gaining traction, but will take some time to really achieve the objective we want to achieve. But the key thing we must recognize that if you are not going to, changing the structure of an economy, particularly in terms of export and imports, is not something you do overnight. The major challenge we have today is that the price of crude, our major export, has declined, and that the demand for crude has also declined. And that's why we're seeing a negative balance of trade. Because overall, despite the reduction in imports, we still saw that the reduction in export did not compensate for the reduction in imports. So that's why we have had 2 consecutive quarters of negative balance of trade.
Thank you for that, sir. And thank you for mentioning that that positive highlight with agriculture. Agriculture Q1 agri imports up by 12.02% compared to Q4 2019. You mentioned crude, and thank you for mentioning that as well. 72% of exports for crude, the remaining 27 or so percent for non-oil exports. Are we underestimating, Mr. Chukwu, how difficult it is going to be to diversify our income stream away from crude? Because these numbers continue to show crude being the bulk of what we're exporting. So are we underestimating how tough it is going to be?
Well, I don't think we are underestimating that. Obviously, what I would say is that some people thought that diversifying the economy is going to be a light bulb effect, that you just wake up, take a few policies, and you see your economy that it wouldn't take that short time. I think we must recognize that we need to do the heavy lifting as a country for us to diversify the economy away from what you call extractive industry, which includes crude and export of raw agricultural products. Because if you look at even the export of agricultural products we have there, which also increased, you also realize that largely raw agricultural products, cocoa and cocoa-related items, cashew, sesame seeds, and what have you. But the basic thing we have to do is that we need to begin to export manufacturing products. And for us to do that, we need to create an economic base that can produce those manufacturing items efficiently and cost-effectively. And that is what is lacking. Until we achieve that, that level of diversification of our export earnings is not going to happen overnight. So we must recognize that it is got to take a long journey. some of the areas where we have done well, it took us more than 10 years to achieve it. And I always make reference to our transformation from a cement import-dependent country to a cement exporting country. It took up to 10 years to diversify that sector. We can replicate that in other sectors where we have value addition to the raw material we produce locally. Until we achieve that, and to do that, you need to address those constraining factors, which includes power supply, critical infrastructure, transport infrastructure. Transport infrastructure that I refer to, not only just road infrastructure, you also look at export-oriented infrastructure facilities, like the seaport, the export seaports. We need to address those things. And first, you need to produce efficiently so that your products can compete with whatever you produce anywhere in the world. Two, you must have the logistics to export those products to other countries. And in Nigeria's peculiar situation, we neither have the capacity to produce efficiently, nor do we have the logistics to export efficiently. So we need to address both critical infrastructural deficit before we can diversify the economy to the extent that we can account for less of our imports, of our exports, and we will restructure the our international trade so that we go back to a positive balance of trade, even without an increase in our year price.
Thank you so much for that. In fact, that was about to ask you. I was about to ask you about the role that infrastructure plays in boosting exports. So I don't know if we can attach a percentage to this. Is infrastructure 95% of the conversation in boosting exports, as you just alluded to?
Well, I wouldn't attach a percentage to you, but what I would say is that a lot of factors have to come into place for you to be a major producer or to be an efficient producer. Infrastructure is one of the critical resources you need. You also need quality labor, skilled labor. One of the reasons why people keep going to China is because of the quality of their labor supply, both in terms of size and quality, in terms of competence. Today, a country like Vietnam are becoming manufacturing bases in the world. And simple is that they have also upscaled their competence level. So beyond infrastructure, we also need to address the skill gap that we have in the country. We have a huge youthful population, but you look at the quality of education that we currently have in the country, and you also look at the competencies of those who have actually left, graduated from schools, including technical competence. We need to also reorient our educational system and focus more on technical education so that people will come out and be able to do things with their hands and with the skills they've acquired in schools. So until you achieve those things, I'm not going to narrow it only to physical infrastructure. We also need to address the issue of the quality of labor. It's not enough to have a large population, but unskilled population. That becomes rather a burden to you instead of being a strength to the country.
Thank you so much for that, sir. Thank you for that answer. Now, you mentioned just a second ago that just as an illustration, a lot of people keep running to China for goods and so on. Our major import trading partners, according to these stats, China 26, they top the list, China 26.28%, followed by the Netherlands, the USA, India, and Belgium. That's for imports. Our major export trading partners, India topped the list, and then Spain, the Netherlands, South Africa, and Cameroon. Only 2 African nations out of the top 10 there. Is there a case here when you look at the top 5 export and import trading partners, is there a case for the African Continental Free Trade Agreement to get started as quickly as possible, to have us trading more here at home?
Yes, but the African Continental Free Trade Agreement must be supported by those infrastructure deficits that needs, I said, are currently lacking. For instance, if you look at what was exported to Cameroon, it was basically vessels, and we did not manufacture those vessels, you know. They are maybe previously used vessels that we sold to Cameroon, and we sold an aircraft, a used aircraft to Ghana. So if you decompose the export to African countries, apart from South Africa, which we export crude, South Africa imports crude from Nigeria, what we export to other African countries are largely re-exportation of what we actually imported. Like I did mention the case of Cameroon that featured prominently the first time in a long while. And the basic thing is that we are not manufacturing enough for our local consumption. And when we do not even have the logistics to export those products. I did mention the issue of cement. Today, we are producing enough cement as we should be able to export cement to other African countries. But do we have the infrastructural supply to export cement? Recall, Lotus, that we closed our borders to our neighboring countries for more than 6 months. And that means it became difficult to export through the land borders. And we currently do not have ocean-going vessels that have, as their area of operation, they call it West African Corridor. What you realize that if you have to export to even an African country, you may need to export to Antwerp in Netherlands, in Belgium, or go export to Netherlands and re-export back to Africa. And those are some of the major constraints I said, look, for us to really restructure this economy to the point we would ensure that oil is no longer the critical foreign exchange earning or the dominant export products. We also need to support our business environment with the supporting infrastructure, including export terminals or export infrastructure, seaports that can handle export of not only liquid goods, but also solid goods, containers. And we really have not done that. Our ports are some of the most inefficient ports in the world. So we need to address that. In terms of whether the fact that we always Cameroon and South Africa featured in our international trade among countries, and whether it actually recommends for immediate implementation of African Continental Free Trade Agreement. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement will be submitted as basic infrastructure, transport infrastructure among African countries for that to work efficiently. Otherwise, you may still have to deal with the issue of exporting to other countries and re-exporting to Africa.
All right. Mr. Johnson Chukwu, the CEO of Cowry Asset Management, I do appreciate you joining us.